The Galactic Council Chamber, a towering construct of crystalline spires and pulsing energy conduits, hummed with tension. Representatives from across the stars had gathered, their forms varying from gelatinous blobs to towering, multi-eyed insectoids. The air was thick with the scent of 100 atmospheres, the blend of alien pheromones and ozone from the floating data displays making the entire scene feel like a battlefield before the first shot. High Chancellor Rartok, a creature of regal stature with dark metallic skin and piercing golden eyes, stood at the center, exuding an air of authority. His patience had worn thin. He raised one of his clawed hands, demanding silence, and the murmuring crowd stilled. "The human problem must be dealt with," he declared, his voice reverberating through the hall. "They are an anomaly, a species that defies the known laws of conflict and survival. Unpredictable, dangerous." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Bralgothian representative, an armored brute whose kind had conquered entire star systems through sheer brute force, grunted in frustration. "Their technology is inferior. Their physiology is weak. And yet, time and time again, they leave devastation in their wake." He slammed a thick, plated fist onto the council's marble table, the impact cracking its surface. "They should not be a threat, yet they are." A Ziffler bureaucrat, with a thin, elongated frame and luminous eyes that blinked in asynchronous intervals, leaned forward. "Perhaps we have underestimated their adaptability, their resilience, even their luck." He almost whispered the last word, as if the concept itself was offensive to a species that prided itself on mathematical precision. Rartok's golden eyes narrowed. "We cannot allow them to continue unchecked. 2 humans, no more, have humiliated our best operatives. These outliers, John and Jane Vance, have personally dismantled high-priority operations and eliminated some of our most promising enforcers. We believed them to be unremarkable when we first monitored their presence. That was our first mistake." The Zultraxian warlord, a reptilian brute encased in biosteel armor, bared his fangs in disgust. "Are we truly gathered here to discuss 2 insignificant mammals? My forces could incinerate their entire colony before breakfast." Rartok tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his expression. "Oh, your forces did try. And tell me, Warlord Krovnor, how many returned?" Krovnor's growl was low and dangerous, but he did not answer. The room darkened as a holographic display came to life, showcasing grainy security footage from their last failed attempt. The assembled counselors watched in silence as a strike team, armed with the latest plasma weaponry and cloaking technology, descended upon a quiet settlement on the planet Chiron 5, where the 2 humans had taken residence. The mission had been calculated, flawless on paper. And yet, the footage told a different story. It showed the first wave of elite soldiers moving through the dense jungle, their armor reflecting the moonlight. A shadow shifted between the trees. There was no sound, no warning. One soldier fell, his throat slit with an unknown blade. Another's helmet shattered as something, a bullet impossibly fast, tore through it with surgical precision. Panic set in. The highly trained forces devolved into chaos. The recording continued, showcasing a massacre carried out with brutal efficiency. The few survivors were later found babbling nonsense about impossible reflexes, weapons conjured from nowhere, and a coffee mug turned into a lethal projectile. By the end of the footage, not a single council member made a sound. The silence was only broken when a feeble-looking delegate from the Valran Consortium, a species known for their diplomatic tendencies, cleared his throat. "It would seem we are dealing with professionals." The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. Rartok deactivated the hologram. "These are not ordinary humans. We have encountered warriors, tacticians, and savages before. But John and Jane Vance are something else. The humans have a term for individuals like them." He leaned forward. "Assassins." The word was alien to some in the chamber, yet instinctively understood by all. A hush fell over the assembly. For centuries, the council had classified species into tiers based on their threat levels. The Bralgothians were brutal, the Zifflers calculating, the Zoltraxian savage. Humans, in contrast, had been marked as a peculiar anomaly, dangerous in large numbers, but hardly worth consideration on an individual scale. That assessment had been woefully inaccurate. A lesser official, trembling in his robes, spoke hesitantly. "We must send our best. The High Guard, perhaps. Or a battalion of war droids." "No," Rarthok interrupted smoothly, his golden gaze unwavering. "We need something better." He turned to the gathered warlords and strategists. "We are no longer hunting mere fugitives. We are waging a war against legends. If these humans have taught us anything, it is that traditional methods will fail. We must outthink them, overwhelm them." The Bralgothian general exhaled deeply. "And if we fail again?" Rarthok allowed a rare, humorless smile. "Then we will pray they have mercy." Across the galaxy, John Vance wiped the sweat from his brow, sighing as he leaned against the wooden railing of his modest homestead. The sun was setting, casting golden hues across the fields, and the distant sounds of night creatures filled the air. His boots were dusty, his muscles sore from a day's work tending to a life he had never expected to have. Jane emerged from inside, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, her expression unreadable as she handed it to him. He took it without a word, taking a slow sip. "They're coming again," she said finally. He didn't ask how she knew. Jane had a way of sensing these things, like a predator that could feel the shift in the wind before a storm. He took another sip of his coffee, savoring the taste. "They don't learn," he murmured. She sat beside him on the worn steps, stretching out her legs, eyes scanning the horizon. "We could leave." John exhaled through his nose. "You want to?" A long pause. "No." He nodded once, setting his cup down. "Then we stay." Jane leaned her head against his shoulder, sighing. "They're not ready for us." A dark humor flickered across John's face. "They never are." Far beyond their peaceful settlement, warships gathered in orbit, engines humming with barely contained energy. Squads of elite operatives reviewed their mission parameters, unaware that they were already as good as dead. The hunt had begun. Again. The aftermath of the failed strike lingered like a plague over the Galactic Council's chambers. The elite forces they had sent to eliminate 2 lone humans had been annihilated with almost comical efficiency, though no one was laughing. The weight of their humiliation was palpable, filling the grand hall with a suffocating silence as High Chancellor Rarthok steepled his long fingers together, contemplating the next move. Before him, the surviving soldiers stood in shameful disarray, their armor dented, their faces pale beneath their helmets. Some still trembled, haunted by what they had witnessed on that desolate planet. The reports had been conflicting, but the underlying message was the same. John and Jane Vance were not just dangerous. They were something else entirely. Unnatural, unstoppable. One particularly shaken officer stepped forward, his mandibles clicking nervously. "We were prepared for resistance, High Chancellor. We had superior firepower, cloaking technology, and combat drones. But they anticipated everything. It was as if they knew our movements before we did." Rarthok studied him unblinking. "And yet you lived." "How?" The officer hesitated, clearly hesitant to admit the truth. Finally, he swallowed hard. "They let me go." A murmur spread through the council chamber, hisses of disbelief and murmured theories circling like carrion birds. Rarthok leaned forward slightly. "They let you go." The officer nodded stiffly. "The male one, John, had his weapon to my head. He could have ended me with the same ease he dispatched the others. But he just looked at me, almost as if he were bored. Then he said, 'Go home.' And I did." Rarthok exhaled slowly, barely restraining his frustration. This was not the behavior of mere killers or warriors. These were individuals operating on a plane the Council had failed to comprehend. Not savages, not reckless warlords, but something infinitely worse, calculating professionals. Across the room, Warlord Krovnor sneered. "This is absurd. We are an intergalactic empire. We have crushed civilizations, reduced entire planets to dust. You're telling me that 2 humans, a primitive species barely a few thousand years into space travel, are beyond our reach. The Velran diplomat, the same feeble-looking creature who had earlier referred to the Vances as professionals, adjusted his long ceremonial robes and spoke carefully. Perhaps we must reconsider our approach. Clearly, brute force has failed. Perhaps negotiation. Rardhak cut him off with a dismissive wave. There will be no negotiation. The chamber tensed at his words. His golden eyes gleamed with an unsettling certainty. We did not come to rule the galaxy through diplomacy or half measures. We do not bow to legends or myths. These humans have humiliated us once, but it will not happen again. With a subtle gesture, the room's central console activated, displaying a vast and intricate tactical array. Hundreds of warships, elite bounty hunters, and entire legions of combat drones hovered in the void of space, awaiting orders. The assembled council members stared at the display, comprehension dawning in their eyes. The Bralgothian general crossed his massive arms, studying the scale of the mobilization. You intend to launch a full-scale campaign against them? Rardhak's lips curled into something resembling a smile. No, I intend to make them wish they had never been born. There was a collective pause before the warlord let out a gruff chuckle. I like it. Of course you do, Rardhak murmured, already lost in the logistics of the operation. He turned to the high-ranking strategists flanking him. We will not make the same mistakes. This time, we do not send team. We do not send a fleet. We send everything. Orders were dispatched. Across the stars, warships shifted into motion. Hyperspace drives activating as fleets converged. Bounty hunters, some of the deadliest in the galaxy, were called from the shadows. Each of them had brought down planetary warlords and political dissidents. Each of them had earned a name spoken only in hushed whispers. Among them was Xiphon the Shadowblade, an elite assassin from a species that hunted in absolute silence. There was Blorgak the Unkillable, whose body was encased in regenerative biosteel. And there was Gort the Cyborg Warlord, a relic of a war that had ended centuries ago, but whose programming was as efficient as ever. Each of them studied their targets, two seemingly ordinary humans. They were unimpressed. On the surface of Chiron 5, John Vance leaned against the porch railing, staring at the sky. The air smelled of fresh earth and distant rain, a quiet moment of peace in an otherwise chaotic existence. He could hear Jane inside, humming softly as she sharpened one of her knives. You see it, she called out without looking. He took another sip of coffee. Yeah. The night sky, once speckled with stars, was now filled with something else. Shadows in the atmosphere, flickering shapes that did not belong. They don't learn, Jane said flatly. John set his cup down with deliberate care. They never do. They moved without urgency, an unspoken rhythm between them as they prepared. Jane secured her weapons with quiet efficiency, strapping blades and firearms into place, as if she were preparing for a routine morning jog. John checked the ammunition in his pistols, his movements mechanical, instinctual. Outside, the shadows grew larger. Dropships descended in sleek, silent precision, their hulls gleaming under the moonlight. Bounty hunters disembarked, their weapons primed, their movements calculated. Inside the house, Jane Vance tied back her hair. How many do you think this time? John considered for a moment. Does it matter? She smiled faintly. Not really. The first explosion ripped through the treeline, sending dirt and foliage skyward. The strike teams moved in, silent and lethal, their infrared scopes scanning for human heat signatures. They found none. A shadow moved among them. Fast. Lethal. The first soldier barely registered the movement before a knife slid effortlessly across his throat. The second turned just in time to see John Vance step from the darkness, pistol raised. A single shot, clean and precise, ended him before he could scream. The third had time to react. He was fast, trained, deadly, but not fast enough. John sidestepped his attack with practiced ease, seizing the alien's own weapon and using it against him in one fluid motion. A brutal snap echoed through the clearing as the body crumpled to the ground. Somewhere in the distance, Jane moved like a phantom through the ranks, dismantling enemies with terrifying efficiency. She had a preference for close-quarters combat, striking with a precision that was almost artistic in its brutality. Within moments, the first wave was gone. A heavy silence settled over the battlefield. Then came the second wave. From above, Gort the cyborg warlord watched through his enhanced optics. He had expected resistance. He had anticipated casualties. But this was slaughter. Adjusting his targeting systems, he relayed a silent command. Orbital cannons hummed to life, locking onto the terrain below. John and Jane Vance did not hesitate. A second explosion shook the ground, but this time it was not from the alien forces. It was from below. The humans had been prepared. The very soil had been laced with carefully placed detonations, sending shockwaves through the advancing troops. Gort's optics flickered. His programming faltered for the first time in centuries. John Vance holstered his weapons and picked up a fallen enemy's plasma rifle. He tested the weight, nodded approvingly, then turned to Jane. "Shall we?" he asked. Jane wiped blood from her cheek and rolled her shoulders. "We shall." High above, Rardhawk watched the battle unfold in real time. His expression remained unreadable, but beneath the surface, frustration gnawed at him. His fleet had not just failed. It had been outmaneuvered, outgunned, outmatched. He inhaled sharply, hands tightening behind his back. "Prepare the third wave," he ordered. A nervous aide hesitated before responding. There is no third wave." Rardhawk's golden eyes narrowed. Silence settled over the command bridge. On the surface below, John Vance cracked his knuckles. Jane flexed her grip around her blade. The battle was far from over. Across the vast interconnected worlds of the Galactic Council, fear spread like a virus. The name John Vance, once just another blip in the records of a minor species, had become a whispered legend among the most battle-hardened warriors. His wife, Jane, no less deadly, no less ruthless, had elevated the fear to something beyond reason. They were no longer just anomalies in a calculated equation. They were the reapers that the Council had unwittingly summoned. The remnants of the High Guard strike force, those few who had survived the massacre on Chiron 5, had returned in silence. Their once pristine armor was scorched, their expressions hollow, their voices filled with a rare and unfamiliar thing, terror. Some refused to speak at all. Others stammered incoherently about humans who moved faster than the eye could track, who killed with objects that should not have been weapons, who seemed to dance in the chaos of battle like it was second nature. Rardhawk stood in the center of the Galactic Council chamber, absorbing the weight of their failure. He did not rage. He did not curse. He only stared at the data before him, absorbing the raw and brutal truth. The Vances had survived. They had done more than survive. They had won, and they had done so effortlessly. Across the chamber, Warlord Krobnor sat with his arms crossed, his reptilian maw twisted into something resembling begrudging respect. "They are not warriors," he muttered. "Not in the way we understand the word. They are something else. They are monsters," a Ziffler intelligence officer whispered. His species had spent millennia perfecting espionage and predictive combat modeling, yet their algorithms had failed them. Every scenario they had calculated had resulted in the humans' deaths. Every single one. And yet, here they were, alive, unbroken, untouched. "They are professionals," the Velran diplomat said again, his voice barely above a whisper. The title had stuck. It had weight to it now. Meaning. Rardhawk finally spoke, his voice low, controlled. "They cannot be reasoned with. They do not fear us. They do not seek conquest, nor wealth, nor power. They only seek to be left alone." His fingers curled into fists. "And yet, when we came for them, they responded with a violence that defies all logic." "Then we leave them alone," one of the bureaucrats muttered. Rardhawk turned his golden gaze toward the coward. "And if they decide we are not worth leaving alone," he asked, "if one day they choose to move against us?" The chamber fell into uneasy silence. "No," he continued, "this does not end with avoidance. It does not end with surrender. It ends when they are dead." The silence deepened. Rardhawk gestured, and the massive holoscreen behind him flickered to life. It displayed a list, a long, sprawling document filled with names, locations, and statistics. The most dangerous bounty hunters, assassins, and mercenaries in the known galaxy. This is no longer a military operation, Rorschach said. This is a contract. A collective murmur spread through the room. Krovnor leaned forward, intrigued. You're putting a bounty on them? A bounty? Rorschach smirked. No, the bounty. A number appeared on the screen. The chamber froze. Even those who had seen centuries of war, who had watched entire civilizations burn to ash, felt their hearts constrict at the sheer magnitude of the sum. The number was so high it wasn't just life-changing. It was reality-changing. Empires could be bought with less. This bounty will call every killer, every outlaw, every shadow-dwelling nightmare from the darkest corners of the galaxy, Rorschach said. No one will resist it. No one can resist it. The Bralgothian general exhaled slowly, nodding. They may have survived our forces, but they will not survive everyone. The chamber erupted into hushed agreement. They had found the solution. A military force could be tracked, its strategies predicted, its movements anticipated. But an endless tide of assassins? Of killers who answered to no flag, no chain of command, only to their own greed? That was something even the Vances could not fight forever. The bounty was placed. The message was sent. Across the galaxy, terminals pinged. Encrypted transmissions blinked into existence, and weapons were sharpened. The greatest hunters and executioners the universe had ever known prepared for the chase. On Chiron 5, John and Jane Vance stood outside their modest home, looking up at the night sky. Guessing that's not just bad weather, Jane muttered. John took a slow sip of coffee, his grip tightening around the cup. The stars, once familiar and still, had begun to shift, movement stirring among them in ways that only trained eyes would notice. They're not sending armies this time, John murmured. They're sending specialists. Jane exhaled through her nose, stretching her arms, rolling the stiffness from her shoulders. Good. I was getting bored. The first one came at dawn. A lone figure, cloaked in shadow, moving with predatory grace through the trees. He was silent, a master of unseen death, an assassin from a species that had eliminated monarchs and dictators for centuries. John spotted him before he had taken his third step onto the Vance property. The assassin's weapon never fired. His body collapsed to the ground before his nerves could even process the impact of the bullet that had torn through his skull. By midday, there were more. Some came in squads, moving in coordinated silence, their weapons custom-designed to counter human physiology. Some came alone, confident in their reputations, their skills, their records. They all fell. The battle was not like the Council's last failed assault. There were no war cries, no explosions, no grand engagements. It was quieter, more precise. A dance of death in which John and Jane moved with the grace of predators in their natural environment. A sniper hidden a mile away had his scope trained on the porch. Jane shot him first. A cybernetic hunter, blending perfectly into the foliage, activated his stealth protocol and advanced toward the house. John broke his neck before he even reached the front door. By nightfall, the house was surrounded by bodies. The air smelled of plasma burns and blood. Jane sat on the steps, wiping down one of her knives. Think they'll take the hint? John stared at the horizon, watching as new shapes began to descend from orbit. Bigger ships, more dangerous hunters, the best killers the galaxy had to offer. No, he said simply. Jane sighed, stretching her arms. Didn't think so. The bounty had spread too far. It had reached too many ears. The assassins weren't coming because they thought they could kill the Vances. They were coming because they had to try. The bounty had changed the stakes. The legend was already forming. Kill the Vances, and you become the legend. John finished the last sip of his coffee, then set the cup down beside him. The next wave was coming, and they were ready. The silence stretched across the battlefield, thick with the scent of charred earth and scorched metal. The bodies lay scattered, some crumpled in the dirt, others sprawled where they had fallen. The air was still, save for the occasional crackle of a dying energy cell or the faint hiss of steam escaping ruptured armor. The hunters had come. They had fought. They had died. John Vance stood in the wreckage, his breathing even, his face unreadable. The muzzle of his pistol still smoked from the last shot. His knuckles were raw, his clothes streaked with blood that was not his own. He rolled his shoulders, wincing slightly at the stiffness settling into his muscles. He had lost track of how many he had killed. The first wave had been a challenge, the second an inconvenience. By the third, it had become routine. Jane Vance stepped beside him, adjusting the strap of the rifle slung across her back. A thin cut traced her cheekbone, the only mark left from a fight that should have ended her. She wiped her knife on the fabric of a fallen bounty hunter's cloak before sliding it back into its sheath. Her lips curled into something like a smirk. "That was a lot," she said. John exhaled slowly. "They'll send more." She glanced at him. "You sound disappointed." He didn't answer, but she already knew. There had been a time when violence had meaning, when every bullet fired, every knife drawn, had been part of a larger purpose. Now it was just noise. A series of unfortunate choices that had led the galaxy's most powerful forces straight to their doorstep. A ship overhead hovered in the sky, its engines glowing like dying embers. It was the last of the bounty hunter's fleet, still clinging to the illusion that victory was possible. John narrowed his eyes, tracking its movement. The ship hesitated, then veered sharply, retreating into the atmosphere. Someone up there had made the right choice. Jane tilted her head, watching the ship disappear. "Guess the smart ones finally got the message." John didn't respond. His gaze shifted to the horizon, where more lights flickered in the sky. Not warships, not hunters. These were different. Council ships. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jane exhaled through her nose and started walking toward the house. "I'm getting a drink," she muttered. John watched her go, then turned back toward the approaching fleet. The council had made their move. Finally. No more assassins, no more mercenaries. Just them. The sky darkened as the ships descended, forming a perfect line above the battlefield. A deep hum resonated through the air, the sound of power held in check, of forces that could raise planets waiting for a single command. John didn't move. A single craft detached from the fleet, descending with deliberate slowness. Its landing struts extended, dust kicking up as it touched down. The ramp lowered, steam hissing from the hydraulics. High Chancellor Rorthok emerged. He was alone. No guards, no soldiers. Just him, his robes billowing slightly in the warm breeze. His golden eyes swept across the wreckage, the bodies, the ruined landscape. He exhaled softly, a flicker of something like admiration in his expression. John watched him approach, silent. Rorthok stopped a few paces away, clasping his hands behind his back. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, the High Chancellor inclined his head. "This has gone far enough." John said nothing. Rorthok gestured toward the carnage around them. "Look at what has happened. We underestimated you. We sent armies. We sent assassins. You killed them all." John met his gaze, unmoving. The High Chancellor continued, his voice even. "This is not a surrender. We do not surrender. But we are not fools." His fingers flexed slightly. "If we continue this war, it will not end in victory. It will not end in conquest. It will end in ruin. For us. For you. For everyone." John tilted his head slightly. "And..." Rorthok exhaled, as if irritated by the need to say it aloud. "We are leaving." The words hung in the air, heavier than any threat, any attack. Jane's voice drifted from the porch. "Took you long enough." Rorthok's expression flickered at the casual remark, but he said nothing. John studied the alien in front of him, measuring the truth in his posture, in the set of his shoulders, the flicker of muscle at his jaw. He saw no deception, no false promises, only a man, alien or not, who had finally understood what he was up against. John nodded once. Rorthok inclined his head in return, a silent understanding passing between them. He turned and walked back toward his ship. The ramp hissed closed behind him. A moment later, the engines roared, lifting the craft into the sky. John watched as the fleet adjusted course, their glowing thrusters tilting away from the planet. One by one, they vanished into the void. Jane walked up beside him, holding 2 glasses. She handed one to him, taking a sip from her own. "So, that's it." John took a slow drink. "Looks like it." She glanced up at the empty sky, her expression unreadable. "Think they'll ever try again?" John considered that for a moment. Then he shook his head. "No." Jane sighed, stretching her arms. "Well, guess we have to find something else to do." John smirked. "Got a fence to fix." She groaned. "Oh God, not the fence again." John took another sip of his drink, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Yeah." The wind rustled the trees. The air was still. For the first time in a long time, it was quiet. And John Vance liked it that way.